Jesse, it's so good to connect. Obviously, you're always busy doing some amazing things, and the last few years of your life have overlapped with parenthood. So I'd love to unpack some of those things and some life and career lessons over the next 20 to 30 minutes, if that works for you.
Yeah, great.
Cool. Okay, awesome. I was curious. I saw that you grew up in Missoula, Montana, and I was trying to make the connection. I was curious, like, what did your parents do for a living, and how did that impact maybe some of the choices that you made in your career?
Yeah, I was born in Missoula, Montana, but I only lived there for about a year, and then we moved around a little bit before kind of landing in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and that's basically where I was mostly raised. My We moved around a little bit. My dad was part of the military. He was a microbiologist for the state lab in Albuquerque, which is why we ended up there. And my mom is an OBGYN nurse, a retired OBGYN nurse now. And so they actually had no connection to the arts whatsoever. Um, and it wasn't until my mom took me to see a show at the Albuquerque Civic Light Opera, I believe. And it was a production, I think, of Alice in Wonderland, I believe. And I just loved watching these kids on stage. And I wanted to be on the other side of the footlights. I didn't want to be in the audience. I wanted to be on stage. So my mom enrolled me into this program. And I think she was really surprised that I wanted to do it because I was such a shy kid. But for me, it was about like kind of finding people that had similar interests. And I just loved the idea of performing and being around these other kids who liked being on stage. And that's sort of always been my chosen family. Even like as a young kid moving to New York, like I never felt too much of a connection with many of the kids I went to high school with. But then I moved to New York and I found all these other wacky theater kids. And I was like, oh, these are my people. So I think I had that sense and that sort of instinct at a very early age.
It's really cool that they supported in that interest. I
Yeah.
always hear that, like, put your kids in a bunch of things and see what sticks. I'm curious, when you think about either of your parents, is there a lesson or two that comes to mind in terms of like most important lessons or sort of glean with you?
I mean, I've taken a lot of advice from my parents. It's a lot of it's. I find myself looking back on it now just because I am a parent myself, and you start to look at your parents in a different light once you have kids of your own, and you go back, and it's like you flash back to these moments. You're like, oh, that's why they did this, or that's why they did that. So I don't. I have like this sort of like delayed empathy for them that I didn't really expect to have. And I do find myself sometimes trying to remember like, oh, how did they handle this situation? And sometimes I also find myself like looking for alternate ways to handle certain things. Like I don't have any specific things, but I think that there are moments that I'm like, okay, I remember a similar situation like this when I was a kid, and I want to try things a different way. And also we've changed so much as a society. There are different ways of raising kids now, and I'm interested in the challenges of like kind of incorporating lessons and values that my parents taught me, but also honoring like kind of where we are as a society today.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, even when my parents were raising us, there were no podcasts that she can just listen to, right?
Yeah,
Like there
exactly.
fewer.
Right.
I feel like there's fewer resources.
100%.
I read that you always wanted kids, and this is something I'm always super curious about. Did you feel like you needed kids to have a fulfilled life? Is that something early on that you sort of believed, or was that something later in life?
I don't think I felt like I needed it to feel fulfilled, but now that I have them, I can't imagine. It feels like, if you reverse engineered it, it would feel like there was a huge void in your life.
Yeah.
Justin, my husband, he's 10 years younger. He had a lot more, at least when I met him, a lot of like, I mean, he remains to be 10 years younger, but like when I met him, he was so, young. He was 23 years old. He had all this like kind of energy and like positive feelings about the world. And he was working on the Proposition 8 case. He was working towards marriage equality. And he had a lot of hope. And I think, for him, being a parent was always something that he was working toward at some point. He's working toward getting married and having kids. And he comes from a big family. And I think that's what he knew and what he wanted. And it sort of, after meeting him and becoming, married to him, it was obvious that this was something that we were going to do. And I was excited to do it. But for me, it was always kind of like this pipe dream to have a family and children. And I didn't recognize on television when I was growing up, anyone in pop culture that sort of represented the life that I wanted to have, which is why doing a show like Modern Family was so important and impactful for me, is that I got to be that pop culture representation for kids now. Like, look, you can be a part of a committed relationship and have children and have complicated relationships and be a part of that conversation of what it means to be a family. And so, things changed as I developed my relationship with Justin. And it was, I was really excited to finally start the process. We decided that we'd be married for 5 years before having kids. And it was about 5.5 years before we actually started the process. And I'm really grateful that we had those 5 years to sort of just be together as a family, him and I, before inviting others in. And but it's been a fun new chapter that we're in right now, for sure.
That's pretty cool. What would you say was so far the hardest part of being a dad?
Just that constant worry that, I'm already a worrier. And so putting on top of it, another human being that you have to worry about. And just, in the early, you're a father, right? Did you say yes?
Yeah. The kids are 5 and 7. Yeah.
Okay. So, when your 7-year-old got sick for the first time, it's terrifying. You're like, oh my God. And then, after a year or so, and you're like, oh, this is just something that happens every month or so. He's going to get a weird cough or cold or sniffles. And and then the second one comes along, you're like, okay, I kind of have a little bit of this figured out. And then, so it's that constant feeling that you're always maybe a few steps behind and always constantly playing catch up with feeling comfortable with being a dad. I guess that's the thing that I found most challenging, because I like to have control over situations, and you really have to relinquish control and just sort of trust that on the most part, things are going to turn out okay, and you're going to figure it out. And, everyone's going to survive to see another day. Just relinquishing power. That's a big one for me.
I remember I was at lunch with somebody, and we just had our first, and he said, just remember that the baby's job in life is to survive. So you're going to be fine. Cause you're always checking if they're breathing and all that. You get overly paranoid.
That's right. Yeah.
And I remember the saying of people who had older kids, you're only as happy as your least happiest kid or something like that. Right. So you're always thinking about them. So I imagine that's very true later in life.
That is true. I never heard that said, but that's absolutely accurate.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things you mentioned, Modern Family, this is the most common question when I surveyed people and I let them know we were going to connect, that they asked was there something about your experience in Modern Family, when you think of family values or things you want to instill in your family, that you sort of carry over? I know the kids are young, but something that you want to carry over into your own family from your experience on the show? You're absolutely not.
Well, it's funny because I was someone asked if I would take any advice from Mitchell as a parent. I said no immediately, and they're like, "Wow, that was a quick no." And I was like, "Yeah, it was a quick no." But I guess because I lived it, I was like, "Oh, I don't know. I don't know if he's the person I'd go to. I'd go to Claire first, I think, but I don't know if I'd go to Mitchell." But I do feel obviously it was a sitcom, so it was full of humor, but Mitch and Cam, there was a levity to them. They were freaking out about doing everything right, but they also knew how to laugh with one another. And I think that is important, to not take things too seriously and have fun with your partner if you're lucky enough to be going through this process with someone else. That's something I would take from them. I think at the end of the day, they were both pretty great dads. They certainly had a lot of love for their kids. So
that makes sense. One of the things I was thinking about is, you're obviously super ambitious in your career, and you're obviously super mindful about being a present dad. I also think about the idea of sacrifice, right? When you think about balancing both and sacrifice, and I have a break in, can you give me just 1 second?
Hi.
That's with the lock on the door. I'll be right
Bad.
back. Sorry about that. The question is just thinking about balancing work and life and the sacrifices you have to make. Like, what do you do to show up as your best self? Thinking about, there's always a little bit of a sacrifice if you're
Mhm.
traveling for something and vice versa. Like, how do you think about that? How do you try to strike that balance?
It's hard. I mean, I am still figuring that out, to be perfectly honest. Beckett was born during a pandemic, and I had all the time in the world to sort of be with him and be with him every step of the way for the first, almost year and half of his life. And then when Sully was born, I was literally doing a show in New York on Broadway, and I, would come home on my Mondays off and see him for, just a few hours before having to turn around and leave him. So I think for me, I had to let myself off the hook a lot. And I took a lot of advice and compassion from my friends who are in the same boat, who are performers or actors who travel a lot. And for me, I think it's very important that both Justin and I do the things that make us happy. And I love being an actor. I love telling stories. I think it's important work in a lot of ways. Certainly in terms of like something like Modern Family that brought a same-sex couple into so many people's living rooms. I think that was like very important, and I wouldn't have traded that experience for anything. It also gave me such incredible joy. And I want Beckett and Sullivan to look at both me and Justin and see that the things that make you happy are important, and you need to see those through. And there are sacrifices that come with it. Being an actor takes me away from my family sometimes, and it's really hard. And I will certainly have to look at jobs and really weigh whether or not this is the right thing to do at this time with my kids. But I do want to lead with happiness, and I want them to take that as an example, and I want them to do the things that make them happy as well. So I think a lot of it's just having empathy and compassion for myself and letting myself off the hook, because I tend to feel guilty about those things, and reminding myself that it's important to do the things that make me happy as well, because that makes me in turn a happier parent and a better dad.
Yeah, I think, I was going to ask you about advice to new parents, and I think you kind of nailed it. Something I feel like I still struggle with a little bit.
Yeah,
You're
it's
always
hard.
thinking about. Yeah. Wow. Okay. I was thinking about your partnership with Enfamil, and I was curious just to learn about it, what the
Mhm.
significance of it is. For those who don't know Enfamil, it is formula, right?
Yes.
And I'm curious, like, why Enfamil? What's the significance of that partnership?
Well, I mean, it's the best. That's why. But like, also, I mean, I did a little bit of research before having Beckett, and it's the brand that kept sort of like coming to the top of the list. And then when Justin and I were at the hospital, we obviously can't breastfeed, so they provide you food at the hospital, and they provided us with Enfamil. So I was like, oh, great, okay, they trust it. I mean, it's coming from the hospital. Like, literally, this is the best. So when Sully was born, I of course went down a little bit of a deep dive, and I discovered that Inspire Optimum Enfamil is Enfamil's closest formula to breast milk, which I thought was interesting. I didn't know. It's also the only leading brand with lactoferrin, which is an ingredient that's found in breast milk. When you're at the hospital and you have a surrogate like Justin and I did, our surrogate pumped for us, and she gave us the colostrum, which is the first bit of breast milk. That's very important, not only for the person giving birth, but also for the baby. And so that was just having that being part of the process as well, and then being able to like supplement that with Enfamil was just very important. I mean, I'm like I said, a nervous person. I want to do everything right, and this seemed to be the best brand for giving my baby the best first start. It's also, I mean, I have a lot of friends who are same sex, or traditional couples that are a man and a woman who have a baby, and like they've had problems breastfeeding. I had several of my friends who, like, the baby literally would not latch to the breast, and so like they had to end up using formula, and Enfamil is what they used as well. So it's just there's so many stresses with being a new parent. Like, making sure that your baby has the right nutrients should be like the last thing on your list. Like, there's so many other things to worry about. So this just made it very easy for me.
Yeah. I mean, the other kind
Yeah.
of challenging part is like, you don't know if they're getting breast milk from the breast, like you don't really know how much they're getting unless you weigh them.
Yeah.
Right. It's just, it's such a,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
We had
know.
like lactation consultants,
Yeah.
Cookie, like the lactation, all that stuff, right? There's such
It's a
a
whole thing.
crazy
It's a
world.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot.
Yeah. Do you have any pro tips so far on just feeding in general?
I mean, I think a schedule is really important. I don't think that's anything like revolutionary, but we are pretty strict with our schedule. And it also like helps with sleeping if they know that they eat at this point, sort of like tricks them into like going to bed early. So like, I find that schedule is incredibly important. And yeah, I mean for me, it's also like great time to like bond with your kid. For me, it's also one of the reasons I like cooking is because I have to like slow down and stop everything else. And I sort of feel the same with like feeding Sully. Like I just have to like slow down. I can't be on my phone. I have to like just take 20 minutes, just like stop and just like feed this child. And it's a good reminder that, you need to take things one thing at a time and just like, slowing down is good.
Yeah. I mean, imagine with Beckett, you probably grew up so fast, and it was great that you had the time to be home more
Yeah,
during
sure.
COVID and whatnot. Anything else around that, just partnership, that you think is important for people to know?
Just that I think that, there's so many different ways to obviously have a child, to expand your family. There's so many different ways to give your baby the nutrition that they need. I don't think there should be no stigma around any of these things and any of these choices or any of these ways that you choose to expand a family, or that you choose to raise your children, or that you choose to feed your children. So, if you are going to be using formula, there's no shame if against that. Like obviously that was the only option for Justin and I, but if you are someone who can breastfeed and like you feel like that's something you need to do, that it's a great option. Like there should be no shame around that. At the end of the day, you just want to get your baby the most nutrients that they can get, and it's because they want to grow up big and strong. And proof and point, Sullivan's like in 9-month-old clothes, and he's just knocking on 5 months old. So like
Wow.
he's obviously getting exactly what he needs. So I just feel like letting yourself off the hook and taking taking the help where you can get it is absolutely important.
I think you nailed it though on the stigma. I just remember our first, it was maybe my stigma was like, oh, you're going to breastfeed for like 2 years straight. No, like I just never knew how hard it was. And I think you're right. There is this sort of judgmental aspect of even formula, right? Like, and we shouldn't judge anybody. Like, you do your research and you make the best decisions for your family, right?
That's right.
Okay. Flipping back to your career, best career advice you ever got, what would it be?
I don't know if it's the best, but it's just what popped into my head when I first started doing Modern Family, and I was being recognized a lot. And we were sort of like this overnight thing, and all of a sudden people were asking for our photos. Ed O'Neill said to me, just avoid drunk people, because it's a lose-lose situation. If you're generous, you say, sure, let's take a picture, I guarantee you they're going to abuse it, and they're going to be sloppy, and it's never going to be enough. And if you try and get out of it and say, not right now, they're going to be, aggressive towards you and combative. So he's like, just avoid drunk people. It's kind of good advice just in general for anything.
I think so. I'm 40 now. I grew up watching him. Like,
yeah.
I mean, that was my formative years of like watching Ed O'Neill. I imagine you did as well. So it sounds like great
Oh,
advice.
yeah. I mean, I wasn't allowed to watch Married with Children. It was a little too like risque, but I would sneak it. And yeah, it also was so shocking because when I finally did meet Ed in person, I was like, wow, you are so different from the character you played on Married with Children. And he's truly just like such a chameleon. I mean, I was shocked at how different he was and how grounded he was in Modern Family. It was quite remarkable.
That's amazing. What do you think is the worst career advice you ever heard that you think people should be mindful about?
The worst career advice. Oh God, there's probably been so much. I just feel like, I studied musical theater. That was what I went to school for, and I I even there, I mean, it probably still exists, but I just feel like you had to be good at everything, or they expect you to be good at everything. You have to take all these dance classes and dialect classes and singing classes and obviously acting classes. And I just feel like that's not, it's okay to not be good at things. It's okay to excel at certain things and not others. Um, you are your own unique person, and that's enough. I tried to be really good at everything, and so I was like kind of just mediocre at everything because it's impossible to nail it. So I was like, let me just focus on like one or two things that I can really nail, and that's when I started like booking work because I was being truthful to like the talents that I
I love it, man. I feel like you gave me everything I need, unless there's anything else you
had.
wanted to talk about.
No, that's it for me.